So I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting to order, so it's okay. And we need to, one of the first orders of business is to assign a phone to clerk for the meeting. Hi. Anybody? Thank you. And then do we have the minutes for the night?
Hi, everyone.
Hi, John.
Yeah, I think we need to take a time.
Oh, sorry, thank you. It takes a village. I'm gonna start by taking attendance because I was just kindly reminded of that. I'm gonna start with Mark. Here. Patrick. Here. Scott. Here. Elizabeth.
Here,
Linda.
here,
Emily.
here.
Dan. Here. All right, thank you all.
Yeah.
Oh, whoops, and John is here, right?
I'm pretty sure I'm here.
Okay, good, thank you. And Peter?
I'm here as well.
Oh, that's good. Am I forgetting anybody? I don't, Lee?
Lee is here.
I do not see Aaron though, yet. Okay, all right, thank you, everybody. All right, so we have a clerk, we have attendance. Do we have minutes to approve for the 9th, from the 9th?
Yeah, minutes were included. I think Lee Smith was the clerk for that meeting, and I think he sent me back some edits this morning that I did not get a chance to send out. But Lee, if you want to comment to those, if those are administrative or not.
It's just rephrasing comments that I myself made, so.
Okay.
Be surprised if anyone had any objection, but. I didn't take anybody else's comments.
All right, well, I would welcome a motion to approve the minutes as amended.
So moved, Peter.
So that, who wants to be second?
Second.
All right, Peter moved it and Linda seconded. Thank you. I have to do a roll call vote.
Mark, yes. Patrick, yes.
Yes.
Elizabeth, yes. Linda, yes.
Aaron, nice timing.
Here.
We're approving minutes.
Yes.
Okay.
Emily, yes.
Yeah, thank you. John
Yes.
and Peter, did you say yes?
Yes.
And Lee?
Yes.
Okay, thank you all. It was very well done. Despite my hiccups.
Dan, just want to let you know, I've got to drop off at 1 o'clock for another meeting, so I just wanted to make you aware of that.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so the first order of business is a discussion with Urban Land Institute regarding the technical assistance program. Emily, I think is going to introduce this, and we have a visitor. Thank you for joining.
So I'll invite Larry to the table. You want to sit here, Larry, actually? Sure, great. So in the room today, we have Larry Spang. Larry is a partner at Arrow Street for his day job, but he's also the chair of ULI's Real Estate Advisory Council. And on the video today, we have Michelle Lambers. She's executive director of ULI. She's been with ULI for 16 years, very seasoned. And also Sandy Silk, who is with Jefferson Apartment Group and is the current district council chair of ULI. So really seasoned team of folks representing ULI today. We're happy to have you. So I'll hand it, Michelle, you might have some slides to share.
Hi, yes. Yeah, I have a few slides that will go through the impacts of the program that we've seen locally, as well as the process. And then Sandy and Larry and I are all available to answer questions.
Great. Thank you. And I have had, just while she's pulling that up, a few different conversations with Michelle and the team here. So they're up to speed for the most part as to where we are, and very familiar with the site.
Great, I can jump in unless there are any other further questions or comments. Okay, good morning or good afternoon, I should say. I'm Michelle Landers, the Executive Director of ULI Boston. I have been with ULI Boston for about 15 years and participated on dozens of technical assistance panels. And like I mentioned, we have some member leaders available too who can talk about the experience serving as a panelist, as an expert. So ULI Boston TAPS program, we've had over 50 TAPS over the past 20 years. We've worked with communities large and small. A major sponsor is Mass Development. They provide an annual sponsorship fee and help source 2 to 3 TAPS per year, and then usually provide additional assistance. They also provide panelists on TAPS that they don't sponsor, which can be key in looking for further grants for planning or implementation. We generally have between 4 and 6 TAPS each year. This program is overseen by our real estate advisory committee. And a few years ago, we decided that we wanted to create a tool to measure some impact. So a lot of the stats that you'll see in the coming slides are from that process. There's a report called Reimagining Communities, available on our website. Happy to share that. That goes a lot more into depth on these items. So the overarching TAP themes that we are asked to weigh in on are downtown revitalization, neighborhood revitalization, key asset redevelopment, which I think is probably what we'd be thinking about here, as well as corridor revitalization, master planning. A lot of different specific items can fall under these categories, but these are sort of the big picture headlines and the places that we can generally provide the most useful input and recommendations. Some of our key recommendations coming out of those TAPs associated with those topics are zoning reform, lots of wayfinding, signage, and streetscape improvements, increased study area connectivity, private investment incentives, placemaking, residential development. As you can see, we go through the list. So these were recommended in 65, starting with zoning reform, % of the recommendations that we had for TAPs. And again, this information is available if you want to take a deep dive. Also happy to answer any questions. But these are a lot of what you might expect to see for recommendations for the kind of issues that communities are struggling with. And then the feedback. So we got some direct feedback from the municipal representatives who worked on these TAPs with us. 82% said that their behavior and approach to municipal planning and economic development strategies was affected. Stakeholder engagement was affected, as well as municipal zoning strategies and redevelopment of key municipal assets. So a lot of, I think, both the members who participate as well as the public sector who serves as our liaison to the community can really get a lot out of these engagements. And then I just have 2 quick case studies that we'll talk about. One is Haverhill. We were in Haverhill in 2011, and we were asked to look at a part of downtown Haverhill on Washington Street that had previously undergone, urban renewal in, I think, the 1960s and 70s. And to date, at that point, that part of town was sort of the least active, had vacant buildings, had lots of parking, but not necessarily a lot of places to go. And the older part of that downtown was thriving with breweries and shopping. It was a little bit closer to this train station. So we were asked to look at ways to reconnect the downtown, perhaps connect it with its water. There's a Merrimack River runs right behind downtown, but was sort of separated by I think a berm that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers had put in place for protection, but really separated the community from the river. The municipal planning staff was, was pulled very thin there. They had a lot of issues to deal with, not quite as many resources, but felt that we could come in, give some good advice, think about how they could tackle some of the issues they were dealing with. And it really, I think, jump-started and gave them the confidence to say, we want to make an impact in our community. We're going to find the resources, and they did. Within a few short years, you can see the proposed rendering that came out of the TAP on the left, as well as the final boardwalk that was implemented within like 3 or 4 years on the right. So this had a major impact in the community. There's been all kinds of investment in the downtown. One building that had been vacant for 40 years saw investment by, I believe it was UMass Lowell, putting a technology campus right there in downtown. They've seen private redevelopment and private new development downtown in terms of residential housing. And it was a great kickstart for this community to attract those both public and private investments. And then another case study we did, which was looking at one key developable asset, was the Worcester Courthouse. So this courthouse had been decommissioned. The city asked us to think about what uses would make sense in that location. It was in Lincoln Square. It was right near their police station, near, I think, Worcester Polytechnic Institute and the Mass College of Pharmacy had a campus right there. The auditorium was across the street. There was a boys club, a lot of empty buildings that had historic value to the community. But specifically, we looked at the courthouse. And one of the most interesting parts, at least from my perspective, was when we were touring it. The beautiful courthouse had a lot of original elements from when it was first built in the 1800s. And then there was a more modern annex, and they said, well, you know, we could demolish this. And the panelists said right away, this new annex, which might not be as beautiful from the outside, actually has the best dimensions for residential housing or hotel or whatever uses that we had been talking about. And it actually would be key to be keeping that part of the building. And then a few short years later, Trinity Financial redeveloped the courthouse, both the annex as well as the original courthouse, into mostly affordable, but some market rate units, and has revitalized what was kind of this giant hulking empty building sitting near their downtown into a lively place filled with residents, and revitalized a lot of that general area of that community. So those were just a couple of examples, a couple of ways that these TAPs can impact the communities we work with. So how does it work? Generally, it's a one-day process. We have gone as long as 2 or 2.5 days if we decide that we need additional time for stakeholder input or site tours. But a typical TAP is 1 day. We'll do some briefing in advance with the panelists, get an opportunity to understand what's happening, the background of the community. Some folks will be very familiar with the community. Some folks will have a fully objective point of view, and we'll need to get up to speed with the facts on the ground. The day of the TAP, we will do the site tour with a team that you put together who can tell us about the site as well as the larger context. We'll conduct a series of stakeholder interviews, and those can be anywhere from 20 up to probably 60 or 70 people, depending on how we break up the team and how much time we devote to that. And again, we have done stakeholder interviews separately when it's been needed. We can do them small groups, closed door, we can do larger sessions. But we really want to hear from people in the community, residents, abutters, town staff, municipal officials, anyone who has go into a charrette that afternoon, and we'll present our initial findings to the public that afternoon or that evening. We actually have a TAP going on today in Salem, and I'll be going down to see that presentation about 6:30 tonight. Following the TAP, we have a professional writer who joins us for the day. They will work with the panelists to put together an in-depth report that will go through and explain all the reasons why we made these recommendations. We generally don't do additional research, although we may provide some examples just to show precedent. And then that report is available about 8 to 10 weeks after the presentation. The presentation is available immediately. And I'll just add in a number of communities. We've come back, we've done a series of TAPs. And I will mention also that the TAPs are the local version of a national ULI project called Advisory Services Panels, ASPs. Those are generally 5-day panels. They're sort of a deeper dive into the issue at hand, generally for much larger, more complex issues. Those are generally around, I think, $125,000, which covers the cost to bring in panelists from all over the country, sometimes as well from other countries if we wanted an international perspective. Our TAP would draw from our members across New England. We have about 1,400 land use professionals who are architects, developers, designers, planners, engineers, attorneys, people in finance, really representing the entire spectrum of land use professionals. So for a local TAP, we would draw on those members. They join us for the day. They donate their time. So they are, fully objective. The administration fee comes to our organization to help facilitate the day, as well as pay the writer and any other professional services we need around that. But that's sort of the TAP in a nutshell. We have looked at all kinds of municipal facilities. We have looked at state hospitals that have been conveyed into communities that aren't quite sure what to do with them, how those assets would be redeveloped. So we have a really broad spectrum of the kinds of things that we've studied. And a lot of communities have seen those recommendations come to fruition. So I'll leave it there. Happy to answer any questions from the organizational side. And again, we have Larry there and Sandy in the on the Zoom who can answer any questions from a professional point of view.
Thanks, Michelle. I'll start. I have a couple questions. So we are, so DCAM, right, we're sort of working with DCAM, we're trying to make a collaborative process with them. And if we were to engage ULI, I mean, you'd be representing the advisory board. But how would there be crossovers with DCAM? Like, is this sort of like, do you recommend, I guess, how to make the relationship with DCAM most efficient? Or is this really just a process that we use? It's gonna help us determine the highest and best use for the site, the various kind of components you mentioned, right? Connectivity with the broader town, placemaking, et cetera. But I think we're all trying to figure out sort of how our relationship with DCAM is gonna kind of come to fruition.
So I can start and then maybe hand it over to Larry or Sandy, but DCAM could either serve as a co-sponsor of the panel and help make decisions about those stakeholder interviews, participate in the site tour, or they could serve as a stakeholder. And I think that's something we could think about as we work through the application and how you want the recommendations to be targeted towards, the municipality or towards both entities.
Yeah, I was just gonna suggest, Michelle, that as a stakeholder, seems to make sense. It'd be a little interesting to be a co-sponsor because then you'd be sort of trying to figure out who's driving the tap. And I think one of the benefits of the tap is you're developing a set of questions that you are interested in and want this group to answer to. And sometimes they are specific, sort of site planning recommendations. Sometimes they're things like zoning recommendations, financial issues, et cetera. So in some ways, I'm not sure that I'd suggest having them as a co-sponsor. If you felt like this, you really wanted to understand some things for this group. If you felt like this was a good time to engage DCAM and build some bridges with them, then maybe a co-sponsorship is a good place to do that.
I've got a question if I may, Michelle. 20 to 60 stakeholder interviews is awesome. That's amazing. I'm curious, how do you go about defining stakeholders and how do you reach out to them and how do you make sure that you have all the important bases covered?
So that is on the sponsor. So the sponsor will identify the stakeholders and give us a preliminary list at that briefing. That is an opportunity for our panelists to kind of look at, the individuals, what their role is, what their relationship is to this project, and make sure that the kind of people they want to hear from are represented. That is a very, very important sponsor responsibility, depth and breadth, and the input from the kind of people who are both necessary to this process from an informational point of view, but also from a community point of view. We understand there are many community leaders that need to play a role in this process for it to be, fully legitimate, people who are very active within the community. So that's something that we work closely with the sponsor on, but it's up to the sponsor to identify and invite the panelists. And we can provide, the language and some background information on what you're inviting them to from our point of view, but it's generally the sponsor's responsibility.
That's great. Okay. Thank you.
I have a few questions. One is I looked on your chart of TAP recommendations, and the very bottom was environmental action needed. So I'm assuming you don't do environmental work, or I'm assuming that the TAPs that you work on already have a knowledge of what work might be necessary. So my question is, if we have no clue what the environmental needs are on a property,
Sure.
does it make sense to do a tap? Or should we get that information first so that you have some ability to understand the site and what its limitations might be?
And good question. So typically, so a one-day event like this, we're not doing investigations of the site. And usually those are coming to us as some community has done them, to your point. We've looked at some sites, you know, you can imagine they're in pretty rough shape, former industrial sites, things like that. And sometimes we will bring a panelist who has that particular expertise in the reuse of a site that's not clean. So that can be helpful in terms of trying to interpret that information and then have it for the broader community. But I think depending on where you see things, I would imagine DCAM already has some understanding of what they've got out there. Could be wrong there. But oftentimes they're doing their own sort of self-reporting. And, you know, from that, you could develop a broader path and say, okay, or you can say to your point, okay, let's get environmental engineers in there doing all the testing and understanding what's out there and then come back. And I think typically we would understand this kind of age building probably have a lot of hazardous materials in them. That's not unusual. And we do that all the time as without really needing a full report.
Okay. Another question I have is, mixed use development, again, is not generally a high recommendation. And can you tell me why that is? Because I think,
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I don't know, Michelle, maybe it's the taps that we have used. Or the types of, so there was some reporting, we went back and looked at a bunch of taps. You know.
Some of that-
Go ahead, Michelle.
I was just going to say some of that may fall under zoning reform. I can think of one community in particular that wanted to explore sort of the cost and benefit of mixed use development in their downtown area, which at the present time was incredibly restricted. So I think that probably would have fallen under a zoning reform rather than mixed use development recommendation. But yeah, frequently, especially when we're looking at economic development strategies, there might also be an assumption of mixed use development in that area. I mean, maybe not listed so specifically as a recommendation.
another question I
And
have,
I think Sandy wanted to address your first question.
thanks.
I'm not sure if you can hear me, but I was just going to add in on the environmental question. If you know that there's environmental issues there or you have a strong suspicion, it can be helpful to identify that in kind of the TAP outline, because then you can get somebody who's got an environmental lens. They're not going to answer all the questions for you, but they're going to tell you more of the questions that you should be asking, which is one way where ULI can be really helpful. So I'm sitting here thinking that depending on the type of environmental, there are brownfield tax credits, there are some federal programs, et cetera. And so having somebody who knows all of that be able to just spew that information really quickly and give you a bullet point list of things could really help move the needle. So that piece for me identifies anything you kind of have a strong concern or suspicion about, right, that hopefully we could validate with DCAM is helpful, because that helps the team better frame the ask to the TAP participants from the ULI side, meaning what is the expertise we want to bring to the table to help answer these questions.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point, Sandy, about somebody who understands the financial and regulatory leverage that you can get versus somebody who's out there understanding the scientific, you know, what's out there, the soil that's out there. So that's an interesting, it's a nuanced difference between two people who deal with the same thing. And depending on the needs, you could say, well, we really want somebody who can help us understand where the dollars can flow from to help remediate this versus what's the actual process of bringing it in.
My understanding right now is that the plan for DCAM is to do a phase 1. So paper study right now. That's the initial piece of this.
And then I did have sort of a tangentially similar question about funding sources. It seemed to me that a number of the studies that you have in your aggregate data said that you were helped the communities find sources of funding for infrastructure and other uses, I guess. Is that something, is that something that you have a capability, looking at this kind of project that you can, I know you have a mass development that you work with, but is this some depth of expertise, or just is mostly if mass development has options, you would know about those, or because you work in conjunction with mass development, that's the primary funding sources for those who have TAP with ULI. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so, let's see, the panels are usually consist of people with a variety of expertise. So there's designers, planners, architects, like myself. We usually try to bring in people with financial and development expertise. As well as legal, zoning, and those kind of expertise, and then miscellaneous pieces. If a particular site, like I mentioned here, you might say, "Oh, we really want a traffic engineer because of the rotary and all those questions," or "We really want an environmental scientist," or some, there's some pieces that get attended on. The funding then can vary. If you're looking at it as development, then you would say, okay, who understands where the markets are and what funding is available through the sort of financial streams of the markets. You can bring, residential market or commercial market, whatever, and bring those, that thinking to bear. There's other folks who come and can say things like, well, there's these sort of grants available in the government realm to help with some of these specifics. It sort of depends, and that's why we try to get a pretty robust panel together. There's usually about 8 to 10, maybe 12, and covering a range of issues so that not everybody is a planner or a designer, not everybody is involved.
If I'm not asking, but I have one last question, and that is, you do have someone involved who's an abutter to this property, and I just want to make sure that there would be the ability to have them not involved in reviewing or steering. Is that?
So typically, one of the nice things about the TAP process is we try to be objective, in the sense that there are folks who are showing up with some skin in the game on one side or the other of the project. And so we try to be clear about that we're coming in with sort of neutral folks with expertise, giving you an objective view based on a discussion in the morning, as Michelle mentioned, or something, to get stakeholder input. So we would imagine in the budget being an important stakeholder to hear from. But then we would also hear from everybody else involved, and then we would come up with our own recommendations and conclusions.
Thank you.
And I'll just add, we do ask panelists to sign a conflict of interest statement so that they, again, have no benefit from one recommendation over another. So they keep that objectivity. And so we ask them both not to market their resources or their businesses to the community. So we don't want them to say, this should be mixed use development. I'm a great mixed use developer, hire me to manage the site. So we try to take that out, and that goes as well for residents. Like I mentioned, we have a number, I don't know if I mentioned this earlier before we were all on the line, but we have a number of members who live in Concord, live in various parts of the town, and we would, if there was a role for them, it would be as a stakeholder, kind of an informed stakeholder, but not as a panelist making recommendations about something they have a financial stake in the outcome of.
Thank you.
Aaron?
My question, one of the maybe public members suggested to us that maybe a ULI process wasn't necessary if you were gonna hire a master planning consultant directly for the project, and I wonder if you could speak to, you know, any advantages you see to possibly including, you know, kind of this as a first step, and then subsequently getting a consultant, or how those might interface, or, you know, one thing versus another, in terms of that process.
Joe, you want to jump in on that one first and I'll follow up?
Sure, yeah. So I think this cannot replace an in-depth master planning process. What we have found and feedback we've heard from communities is this can kind of get all of your ducks in a row so that that process can kind of hit the ground running. So if you've gone through this process, you've identified your major stakeholders, you've heard feedback on some potential recommendations. So you know from the community, if our recommendations were not well received, that maybe you want to think about going in a different direction. You've kind of pulled together all the background information. So it can be a really good step. And it's actually one of the ways mass development uses this tool. If a community is in need of a big planning study, but they're not quite ready for this, this process can really get them ready and help identify all the pieces that need to be in place to really make the most out of that more in-depth process.
I was wondering, it's kind of great and shocking to hear that it all happens in one day.
It's kind of a wild day.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. But you know, I was just scanning the website a bit, and most of the examples that, as far as I can tell, are the 5-day version, the ASP.
Those are the national panels.
I think so.
Yeah.
So I was just wondering, if you kind of have similar report examples that you could share, so we could take a look at what a TAP output looks like.
Sure.
And then is there, is it just assumed that we would do the 1-day version versus the 5-day version? When you described it as 5-day being reserved for complex sites.
Yeah, so let's see, the TAPs for local ULI Boston, the 1-day, sometimes they're 2 days depending on the situation, but those are all available online through the ULI Boston website. So you can check those out and see the types of recommendations. Michelle, you want to talk about the 5-day TAPs?
Sure. Yeah, we've had a couple of local 5-day panels. One studied the waterfront in Portland and South Portland, looking at sort of the resilience aspects that need to be put in place to protect not only like the downtown, but a lot of the energy infrastructure in Portland. And then we also did one with Malden and Everett, looking at the Malden River and the developable opportunities around there. So the 5-day panels generally have more time reserved for stakeholder input. They generally do an open community meeting where anyone who maybe didn't get scheduled as an official stakeholder has the opportunity to meet the panelists, understand what this process is, share any additional feedback. Their site visits are a little bit longer. I would say the charrette, the planning time is longer. It can go all night Thursday night, and then they do their findings on Friday morning. The panelists start writing the report then. So some of the larger, more complex issues, like they looked at, they do a lot of post-disaster recovery. So from flooding, wildfires, hurricanes, they've been in Puerto Rico, they've been in Florida, they've been in Louisiana. They have also done big studies on like the future of the Astrodome in Houston. So generally they're larger projects, and then those panelists are mostly from outside the market. So they're like fully objective in a very different way. Those panelists also donate their time. They donate up to 5 days. And we have a lot of people who love the process so much, they'll do multiple ASPs in a year. So we're talking 2 to 3 weeks away from the office, fully dedicated to this. We are a little bit agnostic. If you decide to go for the National Advisory Panel, we would work with the team at ULI headquarters to make sure folks understand the process, the community, what's happening. We would play more of a liaison role as opposed to the 1 to 2 day TAP. And the most recent 2-day TAP we did was looking at the MBTA bus garage in Forest Hills. They need to replace that parking lot with an electrified bus garage for the new electrified fleet. And they had been having some, just tensions with the community about the scale of the building, the scope, what it would mean. There was a land swap involved with the city. And in one day, I think we were able to come in and, well, 2 days in that case, we reserved extra time for stakeholder input. In the one day that was really dedicated to the charrette, we were able to change some minds, to get people to think a little bit more openly, a little bit more expansively. There was a future developable site that would be owned by the city. We were able to get them to reimagine what some of the uses would be and how it might interact with the facility of the bus garage. So it is kind of shocking that it all happens in one day. And I will say every day at about, every tap at about 4 o'clock, we look at each other and think, are we going to make it to the finish line? But having these, respected industry professionals in the room really helps people draw on their experiences. It's very collaborative. And in my experience, these sometimes take as long as you give them. So we could study this for 3 weeks and the recommendations would probably be pretty similar to what we come up with in a closed door, very intense afternoon session.
So Michelle, in our case, I think we would view this as a complex project. It's been like 100 years in the coming. We're finally there. Would you say that one day is sufficient, or my gut says the 5-day version would be better because it just may kind of produce more. What's your professional opinion?
Another thing to consider is we have done a 1-day tap, maybe 6 months or a year after a national panel, where there's been some time to digest those recommendations and think about next steps. That's something we did in Springfield. I'm happy to kind of produce an overview of both the scale of projects that have had real success with the ASP versus the local taps. One project I can think of that would be somewhat similar in scale is the Westboro State Hospital. That was 23 buildings on 93 acres in Westboro, in a largely residential neighborhood. And they were struggling with what is the highest and best use for this property? And what were the challenges on putting additional residential units, which seemed like the obvious best use. We were able to come out with that, and a lot of our recommendations were implemented on a very challenging site. There's a big cost differential too. So our 1-day panels are $15,000, and our 2-day panels are about $20,000. The 5-day advisory services panels are about $125,000 to $150,000. You do get more time, obviously, with the panels and a more in-depth report, but that would be something for you to consider as well.
I would, Michelle, I would really welcome that, understanding an example, what you did, what were the results. That would be particularly helpful for me
Sure. We can give you a couple of national examples and a couple of local examples.
That'd be great. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the Arbor Way one we did was kind of interesting, and we did the stakeholders on day one. We had a small team discussion about it at the end of the day. And the next day we came in and we charretted for the better part of the day and then presented the ideas. And so that was sort of a little more than a single day, but not necessarily the full 5 days.
Yes, Peter has had his hand up for a while.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that the town places a great emphasis on integrating sustainability into the redevelopment effort, and wondered if you had any examples of your doing the same with ULI panels.
So ULI has a whole department at our headquarters, the Center for Urban Resiliency and Economic Performance, that focuses both on resiliency and sustainability. If that was something that was outlined in the application, whether that was locally or nationally, we can certainly consult and think about bringing somebody on the ULI side to represent that. Or if it was expertise that we didn't have locally, we could certainly make a connection through there with another professional. You know, luckily we are fairly close to New York, the whole sort of Eastern Seaboard. I think there are about 30,000 members between here and Washington, D.C. So if we did feel like we needed additional outside support around resiliency or sustainability, we definitely have those resources.
One more.
And again,
You just have a question.
Yeah.
I just stated one, I just have my thoughts.
Okay, all right, so Michelle, just to build on, follow up on my thing, if you can tell us in those examples, you know, what criteria was in place that made them successful, would be also be really helpful for us to, you know, what groundwork had been done.
absolutely.
Great, thank you. Emily?
One more quick one.
Sure.
You mentioned, Michelle, out of the gate, you know, that mass development can be a sponsor or they can be a panelist. I mean, how do we determine if mass development is eligible to be a sponsor? Like what would they be interested in?
So mass development generally identifies a couple of communities per year that they need some, again, sometimes it's pre-work for a larger study. We could talk to mass development and see if they were interested in sponsoring this TAP. And if it's not something they want to sponsor, they're generally always happy to provide panelists, depending on, again, what you put in that application really determines the expertise that we'll identify. So we really need to understand what are the questions you want answered, what are the priorities for the community for this particular site.
Michelle, what's the lead time on an application?
The application lead time for a local panel, you know, I would say 2 to 3 months. So it's something that could be done in 8 weeks. That would require, you know, for your team and whoever you identify as the sort of liaison to have access for the briefing information, identify the stakeholders, all those things we talked about. On our side, recruiting panelists and scheduling everything that can, you know, that can definitely be done in 2 months. If we have a little bit longer, we tend to have a little bit more success, but 8 weeks would sort of be the minimum.
So sorry, just to clarify, is it 8 weeks from when we submit and have like the list of stakeholders and kind of requirements outlined, or does it run in parallel?
Yeah, so it would be when the application is accepted. So generally we'll receive an application, we'll share it with that real estate advisory committee that meets every month, and then that's sort of when the clock starts ticking. And so from there, you've done like an initial identification of the stakeholders. They haven't all committed, obviously, to a date and time, but the sponsor has kind of thought about those issues and is prepared to start making some scheduling calls.
Yeah, just kind of to get into some discussion about this. This is really helpful. Thank you for coming and presenting and gave me some things to think about. What I will say is that as I'm thinking about how we're going through this process, some of the words that you're using that you help jumpstart, kickstart, talk to people if they're not quite ready for master planner. In my mind, we're ready for master planner. I'm just gonna say that. So I think everything you're talking about community, I mean, obviously it's all important, but I can't imagine having a master planner who's not also gonna be working on those things. I also know that Elizabeth's working on the zoning RFP, and I just want to put it out there that as I'm thinking about this, I think the way to go forward would probably be to put together a comprehensive RFP that had the master planner involving the zoning and everything in there. Not that this wouldn't be useful, but I do think that we're a little bit further down the path than kind of just needing to be kickstarted or jumpstarted. There's a lot that we know, there's a lot of community engagement we've already been taking in. That's my 2 cents.
Thank you. Megan, did you have something you wanted to say?
Oh, thank you. I was gonna ask about the timing too. I know there's a lot of coordination with scheduling, and there's so much work that I participated in one in Maynard a couple years ago. And there's so much work that is put together for materials and application and that kind of thing. So I was just trying to get a sense of the realistic, you know, if this board was interested in moving forward. I think you answered the question about how long once the application's in, and I think there's probably further discussion about looking at the application and really kind of doing that work of drilling down on the questions, so, but realistically, when would this 1 or 2 or week-long session take place? It's sounding like it'd be winter,
Yeah, I agree. It seems too far out.
so I just wanted to ask
Okay,
that.
thank you. I'm sensitive to the time. I want to thank you all for coming in. It's very, very illuminating. Appreciate your good thoughtful answers. I think we're gonna come back to discussing what will
Yeah.
come next. So the next order of business is, subcommittee reports. Patrick, do you want me to cover that? Or do you want me to? I'm happy to do that.
I'm happy to.
It wasn't, we didn't talk about.
Yeah, maybe, I mean, I'm happy to kick it off. So thanks everybody for forming into the respective 3 subcommittees. I think what we wanted to just get into, like today, a bit of a rhythm where every time the advisory board meets, we at least kind of go around the table and hear from each of the subcommittees. The assumption, I will say, in terms of how we work, is that the subcommittees would have met in between advisory board meetings. And so that we wanted to get a, either a quick or an in-depth update. It would be helpful to Dan and I, especially if you want to have a more in-depth update at a upcoming advisory board meeting. You just let us know so that we can budget the time accordingly.
Yeah, and if there are decisions to be made or in between, give us just a chance to think about. And for Shannon, who kind of keeps us all together on the track, I believe she needs to have that material and information no later than Wednesday. So that we typically put the agenda together.
So I think we'll probably start with a placeholder of 30 minutes, anytime the advisory board meets, so we can kind of assume 10 minutes across, but we can flex. With that being said, I know for a fact that the community engagement subcommittee met. And so maybe I will turn it over to our newly elected or designated subcommittee chair, John, to give an update. You're
on mute, John.
There we go. How many times will I make that mistake? Thank you, Patrick. We did have a meeting last week of the committee. The committee consists of Patrick, Aaron, Dan, and myself, as well as Emily Rush. And our meeting last week was by Zoom, so I'll give you a quick kind of rundown of what we talked about and some of our next steps. So basically, the first item on the agenda was to appoint a chair. I was the only person who volunteered, so I won the honor. We talked about the need for marketing support. We think it would be really helpful to the committee to have a part-time person who's available to design flyers, slide decks, and other presentation materials. Could include surveys as well, but someone who's got some good marketing and graphic design skills to support us so that we can be sure that we are responsive and on target in terms of our outreach to the community. So that's one question that we'd like to put to the chairs to understand. Don't need an answer right now, but just to understand, how we might go about making that happen. We don't think it's going to be very expensive. We know the committee has some budget, but we want to be sure that we handle that procurement in the most appropriate way. We discussed a charter for the committee. Patrick was good enough to draft a charter. He walked us through that charter, and that will be being distributed to all of you very shortly. And if you like, I can flash it up on the screen now, or we can just wait until that's distributed. So, Patrick, what do you suggest?
Maybe we just review it offline.
Okay. So, so basically we talked through the responsibilities of the committee, and I'll just read you a couple pieces from it. Our objective is to facilitate effective communication, foster community involvement, and ensure transparency throughout the project's development. And our responsibilities span 5 kind of key areas: stakeholder outreach, public meetings and workshops, communication materials, creating feedback mechanisms and regular reporting to this committee, as well as to the select board on a quarterly basis. So we worked through that. That was good. And again, we'll make sure that gets into everyone's hands in the very near future. We discussed upcoming events. We've been invited to a couple events. One is an October 1st event that the League of Women Voters is putting on, where we will have the opportunity to present on this committee's work. The other is a Concord Climate Action Network event that's going to be on November 19th. So we're planning to attend and present at both of those. I think the presentation will be really primarily, what's the project, what's the process look like, what's the timing look like, and an opportunity to gather input from the community and from the attendees there. Donna McIntosh, who's the town's communications manager, attended the meeting as well. She's been the one who's been taking care of the website for the project. There's a lot of good information up there, including an FAQ. We will continue to rely on her to keep that up to date, but we think that's going to be an important mechanism for answering questions. And, we want to be as responsive as possible. But over time, the answers to citizen queries will find their way to that FAQ. And so that's going to be a good resource for the community. And then finally, we set a meeting schedule. We're planning to meet twice in October. And we're hoping that by the time November comes around, that we will have figured out how we're working, what our priorities are, and that we'll be able to meet once a month on a go-forward basis. So that's what we talked about in the meeting, and happy to answer any questions. Committee members, did I miss anything important?
We talked, I think we're all going to touch on this, but we talked about how to handle and receive and what to do with the emails that the various people are getting, which we'll talk a little bit more about that, I think, over the next meeting or two. And then we will, I think, after we're done with talking about hearing from the other two subcommittees, I just want to spend a minute and talk about the funding sources with you. You're talking, Mark, about that for some of our various initiatives.
Yeah, I would only add that we drafted a preliminary scope of work for potential consulting support. That's it.
One more thing. The other thing that we're working on that we'll be discussing at our next meeting will be, the comprehensive stakeholder list. That's why I asked the question of the ULI rep. We want to make sure that we are as inclusive as we can be and identifying as many people as proactively as we can, that we want to be sure that we solicit input from. But as comprehensive as our list may aspire to be, I think we're also need to put out some kind of invitation, for folks that we may have overlooked somehow who may have input to the process. We want this process to be as inclusive as it can be. And as we said in the beginning, transparency is important. We're going to be as responsive as we possibly can be to share whatever we can to make sure that our citizens know, what we're trying to achieve here and where we are along that journey.
And just one minor point of clarification, that League of Women Voters is the first Friday in November, which I think is the 1st of November.
Yeah. Oh, November. Sorry, I said October. Yeah, November. You're right.
I didn't want any confusion. So thank you, John and Patrick. That was great. Can we hear from the land use planning? I believe that's Peter.
Yes, thank you, Dan. So I was elected chair. Scott Bates was elected vice chair. We're having a rotating clerk. Linda, Emily, Aaron, and Dan are also on the committee. Did I forget anyone? Good. All right, we reviewed our goals and objectives, which are basically to formulate zoning recommendations for town meeting at the long run. We talked about the need for coordination with the community engagement group and also about receiving input from the public and how to handle that. Dan mentioned the need for us to discuss that as a total committee. And we also discussed the need to review DCAM's RFPs to reduce duplication of efforts with the town zoning and planning consultant proposal. We also established a meeting schedule between full committee meetings. And I invite any of the other committee members to pipe up with anything I may have overlooked.
Yes. Any questions for?
One thing I brought up in the meeting was that, I mean, you were there, Dan, I was hoping we could get a sense of the timing of the RFPs from DCAM, what types of RFPs they're putting out, what is expected of what DCAM for their services versus what's expected for community services. And we have a budget, but what is that budget going towards? Are we, and like, so who's hiring the master planning consultant? I'm assuming, we weren't sure, but assuming maybe DCAM, but there's a lot of different consultants that can be added to us, and we're talking about our budget and hiring consultants, but we don't know if it's gonna be DCAM or us. I'd like to really clarify those buckets at some point in time, and the timing of those. So I've been trying to follow the DCAM website just to see if they're putting out these RFPs, but it'd be good to have sort of a sequencing and schedule of all those.
I think Megan and I can, because of the coordination, and Shannon, we can bring that up. That we have.
I can speak to that at some point, maybe during my staff report, or.
That would be great.
Our committee also,
Sorry.
the legal and government affairs committee is also kind of talking about that, so.
Yeah, because they're starting to realize all these interconnected pieces, so.
Because it affects, I mean, the tasks they brought up, Westboro decided they purchase the land. And we're in a different relationship with DCAM. And if we go forward with TAP and how they relate with DCAM, it's a very different kind of relationship. So it's just good to know, is DCAM going forward with the master planning RFP? Do we know? Do we have an answer?
I have an answer. Is this?
Yeah, I'd like to know.
Sure. And well, we have Paul on the phone here too. But what I heard is, I'm having, maybe this is just my own, understanding of the term master planning. I feel like it's used a lot, and I'm trying to really drill down on what does that mean in this specific situation. And so what I heard, what Paul shared with me on Friday is that they are planning, well, a part of it depends on how much the advisory board and the town wants to take on. And trying to negotiate that with what DCAM will do, and like just trying to understand how much does the town want to step in to this role of planning and visioning for the site. And if the town wants to take a leadership role or a partner role or kind of, advise what DCAM will do, that's like a number one thing that I was hoping to really try to understand. And secondly, Paul said that they are not hiring a master planner. So they have planned to and have not moved forward on this yet because there's still conversations here that are ongoing about who's leading this. But the work that they have identified, could use the ULI TAP or not, depending on what you all are deciding here. But then it would move forward to visioning, physical planning, real estate market assessment. And it's kind of teeing up what you would need to do prior to do a master plan, but not necessarily a
Is
master
that like a
plan.
real estate company? Is that like a real estate group type of person who has the marketability, the visioning, all that? I mean, what type of companies?
I think it'd be a planning firm.
So it's a planning firm.
Yeah, that's, yeah.
I'm happy to weigh in a little bit here too. As Megan articulated there, I think at DCAM, I would say we're not planning to do a full master plan. We expect that the selected developer would be in charge of doing a full master plan for the site, getting that figured out. What we're planning to do is a concept plan that would inform zoning. We're not going to say this road has to be here. We're going to work with the town to get to a level of planning that allows you to put the zoning structure in place that outlines what the developer can do, but we're not going to tell them you need to put this building in this specific spot and that building in that specific spot. It's a a path towards getting there. So we are going to hire somebody who is what you would think of as a master planner, but we're going to be going at the concept plan level.
Can I just add, Paul, for point of clarification, in my mind, in trying to answer Megan's question too, we're looking for someone that can do scenario planning. Conceptual scenario planning that can then be assessed from a business impact, from municipal impact, and we can't, it would be very difficult for us to do anything of meaning if we don't at least have some ideas of what this thing, what it would look like.
Yes, we expect somebody who will look at test fits, look at a range of scenarios so that we and you can evaluate what those would have for impacts in terms of use, in terms of density, in terms of the, you know, the way that the site will be played out. But we're not trying to put a plan together for the exact set of X number of buildings that we're just going to then hire somebody to build. Like, that's not, like, the development concept will fit within the constraints that the town puts in place with its update to zoning, which will be informed by, hopefully informed by this collective effort of community engagement and planning. But we're not trying to do something that will just like tell the developer to like build a set of buildings and, you know,
yes,
that's the answer.
Elizabeth?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there is a overarching existential crisis that we're facing on this committee, if I'm just to lay it out. No one is taking ownership of doing this. I mean, I think what I hear you saying is I doubt the state would hate it if we came with a pretty comprehensive plan and said, this is what we want. Sounds like you don't want to do it, but we just keep saying, well, we're gonna kind of conceptually come up with some stuff based on what people want, and then you guys are gonna get some developers out, and then we'll figure out how it looks based on our zoning. We have $700,000 that Simon pushed for. This is a huge deal. In my mind, we take that $700,000, we hire some people who know what they're doing, and we push for an actual plan that we want. We don't just sit back and become reactionary. Because it honestly doesn't even sound like the state would be mad if we had a little more forced what we're trying to do.
That's an interesting way to put it. I mean, the state wants to be collaborative with the town throughout this, and the state definitely wants to know what the town and what residents want. Yeah, I think part of it is perhaps semantics around like what constitutes a master plan versus what constitutes the level of planning necessary for zoning on a specific site.
I don't want us to just say, let's have multi-use, let's put some housing,
I hear you, and maybe, Paul may be right, and maybe we need to look at some samples of what we're talking about, which would address some of your concerns. What sort of happened, I have a lot of familiarity with it, what happened out in Devon's as it relates to housing, because that's what I'm most familiar with, is probably applicable. They had an idea about the kind of density, about the kind of communities they wanted, and they essentially created zoning. Peter can speak better to this than I can, but they had architects involved in developing criteria that in essence created what they wanted. Not down to a buildable set of blueprints, construction documents, permitting documents, but they could sit there and look at that and they could say, this isn't what we, and they basically went out to 12, maybe 15, again, Peter can better speak to this.
But housing is one component of this.
Housing, exactly, no, totally agree, but it's, I believe it's applicable in terms of having ideas about what the uses would be, where they would be.
Who's doing that though? Who is saying, hey, you know what would be great, would be a technology incubator, would be this,
Well,
go out and talk to institutions, I mean,
yes, in my mind, it's, I think just as Paul said, it's gathering the community input. Because we probably around this table, to your point, all have ideas of what we'd like to see here, but it needs to be informed by that gathering, and then it's going to be taken and someone's in my mind again. The master planning architects are going to do a site evaluation and figure out how this stuff possibly fits on that and what sort of considerations as it relates to physical considerations all the other things that a good master plan would be looking at. And then they're gonna start to develop some scenarios. I don't think we want to design this in terms of a finished product. I think we want to be able to feel confident that the multiple developers that show up are going to give us some version of what we're looking for.
So my question is, at the RFP level, when they're looking at developers, are we going to set criteria that say, okay, if you use geothermal, you're gonna get 5 points on a scale of whatever. And then if you use certain parking constraints, you'll get X number of points, so that at the end, there's some kind of ranking of these developers, because how are we going to know that they've picked the developer that reflects the community?
I would expect that,
goals?
as part of the RFP process. I think there's also a step in there related to zoning, which we've talked about, that's going to help also shape this. That they're going to be working, that we're going to have some high level of confidence that will end up with things, a design that we like.
But I don't think for some things you can require in zoning geothermal.
No,
So
no,
how
no,
do
that's
we-
part of the RFP.
That's part of the RFP,
Yes,
but so how do we tell them what to put in the RFP, or what our preferences are that go into that RFP?
Well, I don't want to answer.
Versus only through, you keep saying we're gonna zone.
Yeah,
but-
yeah.
But there's more to revealing
Well,
our
but
preferences than just
the-
zoning.
Sure, but Devon's process was a combination of zoning regulations and an RFP that the municipality put out.
Here, the municipality, as far as I know, is not putting out.
Well, I think we want to hear from Paul, because I don't want to answer for Paul in terms of his.
Scott.
Well, I'm sorry, can you just clarify, there was talk about a real estate project manager, there's the marketability analysis, there's the visioning, the master planning. Can I get just the correct timetable wording and the RFPs that are going out, just so I have a little bit more clarity of who you're thinking about bringing on board?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. I see Kyle's hand up from the rep's office and just want to make sure that we don't move past the point in the conversation where Kyle had something to say. Kyle, give me a thumbs up or thumbs down if you want to jump in now or have me keep going.
Yeah, I just want to bring up the point. The rep couldn't be here today. He had a prior engagement, but he wanted to ask what the plan is for using that state earmark money and kind of what the timeline is for the rollout of those plans. I know that he encourages the advisory board to take an active role in those discussions on how those will be used. So we're just curious from our office's perspective where those conversations are. I don't know if that's with you, Paul, Megan, or the board overall. We appreciate any insight on that.
I think that's my question. $700,000 would go pretty quickly in a 10-year period, and hiring a real estate consultant, marketability analysis, and a master plan architect, you can eat up that money. So it's really about what we're supposed to spend the money on versus what we can. I'm just trying to get a sense of what we can spend their money on, what RFPs are coming out, and what we're expected to spend our money on. That's all. Just trying to have clarity on it.
So I'm gonna step in here for.
Can I just get
one second?
can I just hear from Paul?
Yeah. So I would say that DCAM, kind of per the list that Megan ran down, community engagement, visioning, physical concept planning for the site, and an assessment of the real estate market for various potential uses for the site. That is a scope of work that DCAM plans to put out some portion thereof as a single RFP to hire a probably consulting team, quite frankly, to do. We have been excited to see that the subcommittees are set up because we don't want to get at cross purposes with the work that the town is doing. We particularly are waiting on guidance regarding the community engagement piece. If John and Patrick and company come out and say, we at the town are ready to, be the primary face of community engagement for this. As fellow residents, we want to engage with and, help to consolidate the perspectives of our residents. We're happy to take a back seat to town leadership on that front, with the, intent that we would hear what you're hearing, take what you're hearing, and make sure that it informs the rest of the effort. As far as the physical planning concepts, that's not going to be developed in a vacuum. That's going to be developed as a part of an engaged community process. There are, as we know, more public hearings that DCAM needs to lead, is required to lead, and will lead. And so we will continue to work on those with, in tandem with the land use subcommittee of this board, in tandem with town staff, in tandem with community engagement opportunities. We have the budget for physical planning and have been, working on the assumption that we would make that higher. Our commissioner is required to file a full report on this with the legislature prior to any disposition occurring. So, as a part of that, we figured that we would be the ones putting together that report, but it's not going to be done in isolation. It's going to be done in continued collaboration with this group and with the residents of Concord. And we hope that that will then form the basis and be developed, alongside updates to zoning and other regulations as appropriate to regulate what would then be built on the site. To Linda's question, it's, in my mind, too early to determine, what type of rubric we might put together for the actual solicitation of a developer. And we're not, Scott, I think you mentioned like marketability of the site. We're not looking to hire somebody with like a real estate marketability perspective, but a market perspective, somebody who's going to tell us, what are the types of uses that would have appeal here, but not somebody who's going to be leading our efforts to reach out to the development community and market this. So I just want to make sure that that's clear.
Thank you. Mark, you want to?
One, I wanted to remind us, we were in the middle of some readouts and we haven't actually gotten to the third one. But having said that, it seems to me whether we call it master planning or scenario development or something, at a high level, we need something for the community to react to and to have input to that sort of says, what are we really thinking about doing here? And then later in the process, and remember the timeline that DCAM laid out is almost 2 years long. Then there's some real objective things that end up in the RFP as the state starts to look at how they dispose of this property. So I think one of the things that was useful for me was the answer when ULI said, what's DCAM's role? I think I see them as a stakeholder. They're the stakeholder that's eventually going to dispose of this property in some way. And we're trying, and our role here is to try and channel that into something that roughly, if it is likely to be acceptable to the community when all is said and done, when they get done with that process. So what makes sense to me is that we do engage sooner rather than later in that planning and scenario development, just so that there's, some of the A, B, C, D choices that are out there that the community can kind of say, I like the looks of this. I like a little bit more of that, but less of the other thing, and, begin to develop that. I see there's some municipal needs that need to be developed. We're going to count on staff to really say how much of this property do they need in what ways to satisfy municipal needs, because we know that's a priority and there's, rare chances to get land for municipal use. And then there are other, considerations like how much, so that's the way I'm thinking about it, almost as two phases. One is input into that RFP, but the other one is this conceptual.
I totally agree with you.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
So to Mark's point, we haven't heard from Lee or the legal and governance. Affairs.
Yeah, that's us. I mean, it kind of goes along with some of these things that we're saying. So we met, it's Lee and Mark and me, and Shannon gets to be there too. I had to fight you guys off to be the chair, but I'm happy. Happy to give that up anytime you guys want. I think our first order of business is kind of getting our heads around how we communicate with both state and local organizations or the reps and the committees. Lee was gonna reach out to Paul. I don't know if that's happened yet, Lee.
It did. We spoke last week. We had a good conversation. We're gonna keep the lines of communication open.
So I think that we could be a helpful group in what you're saying, keeping track of what reports are happening and where things are and kind of be the go-between. The other person we want to meet with is Chris Carmody, who's the legislative liaison for the town, and Shannon, we're getting that worked out, how we can do that. And then we started coming up with some big overarching questions where we kind of start with talking to the state, and one of them would be Department of Transportation and what's happening with the Rotary. So I think, go to your point, Mark, I know it's a little bit off topic, but we have to present something that people can react to, and how you access the site is crucial. And if you're not able to access the site from different ways, it's a non-starter that the community wants. You know, I mean, I know the community wants it to go under the Rotary. Well, great, but so I think after we circle back on the 30th, right, Lee, or whenever we can get Chris in, we can talk about the best ways that we can communicate directly with the state agencies. And I think our first thought was Department of Transportation. Does that kind of jive with what Lee and Mark have thought?
Yes.
I think, if you don't mind, for that, you might want to get Public Works involved in that conversation too, because they have been in touch with MassDOT on this, and have started that conversation on a staff level, so I want to make sure we're coordinating.
Yeah, we'll talk to you as well.
We were thinking that because it's government affairs, our job is to have the sort of active interfaces between both municipal, the state, and, you know, if necessary, even our federal government, so that we kind of know how we communicate with them and keep those lines of communications open. We talked about a few things that came out of the engagement meeting, like should we approach Department of Corrections for some kind of tour access kind of thing, and they figured that there might be some activities that we could do in that way and keep those lines of communications as clear as we possibly can. So we figured we'd engage in that. Great.
Just a quick question, sorry, I'm a little confused on what the actual budget is. Is that the public meeting, I think, Kyle, maybe you said 725, I had heard 475. What is the budget?
We thought we would actually ask Chris to try and sort that out, since he's our legislative liaison, and figure out what we can spend money on and how. So I think that once we get that sort of stood up, we would, especially for other groups are saying, when they start to define what they want to spend money on, then we need to figure out which line item essentially we can go for that. There may be opportunities, for example, to spend town funds like coming from ARPA, because they're not restricted to just strictly on the site for certain kinds of activities versus something else.
There must also be a timeline to spend the money, but
Yeah.
Yeah, I can speak to that, if that's, it's a very good question about funds. My understanding is that there was a 250 number, a 450 number for similar purposes. And so combined it's 700, and I'm hopeful that that is what it will be. But I don't really know. I feel like until we have a contract in hand, I don't know. And so I was talking to Paul about this last week and wondering if 3 different budgets should be, proposed here, because I think we will know in October. That's what I'm hearing from Chris, our legislative staff person, and we will get a contract in hand. at that point. My understanding is that the way it is right now, the funds need to be spent by the end of June. Which is very quick, especially if we're looking for a long-term community engagement partner. You know, how would we be able to do that after June? So we are looking at other tools that might be available to encumber funds and use them in a subsequent fiscal year. That's a priority for staff right now. And I wanted to mention another thing about the budget, and my understanding is that the budget is under the authority of the town manager. And so I think this conversation has been so helpful for me today. I am planning on and working with you all to put together a proposal for a budget for these funds. And there's a number of things that you've discussed today. There are a few things that haven't been discussed today that I think might also need to have some funding earmarked. And trying to make sure we have the category set and, you know, what are we talking about here? And Kyle's point taken, you know, how are we planning to spend the money? It's still being baked right now, but, you know, especially with the timeline that we have in front of us, it's critical that we come up with a proposal to spend these funds in the best way that, you know, in partnership with the DCAM resources and you know, concert with what staff is already doing and working on, especially with wastewater treatment analysis, that kind of thing. But I think we're getting there, and I have a couple other things for my staff report, but I'll stop there.
Thank you.
Can I chime in? Quick?
Yes, please.
Thanks. Megan, just as you're looking into or pursuing the contract and the funding, it might be worth asking whether they consider the funds committed if it's a contract, which is hypothetically $100,000 that may not be spent for 3 years, but the contract's entered into before June 30, something like that.
Certainly, yeah. I mean, that's what I thought it was gonna be at first. But I don't think it is right now. And if there is an adjustment that we could make, I think there is some precedent for making a request to be able to spend the funds in subsequent fiscal years if it's been committed. And I think for a project of this scope and scale and importance, I think we can make a really strong case.
Yeah, to build on that, one of the things that we touched on in our first meeting was the ultimate need to make sure that our legislative representatives understand what our ask actually possibly is for future budget years, and so that there's, you know, a consistent proposal getting both sides of the, particularly the state, if that's where the funding is coming from. So we thought that would be something that we would need to address and want to get that into the budget discussions for, you know, subsequent years.
Okay, great. I'm mindful of the time, so I'm gonna.
Yeah, can I just wrap this up? So, for the subcommittees, I would say, like, first of all, Dan and I had discussed an aspiration to move to a advisory board cadence of once a month, starting November 1st. Now, we should come back and kind of approve that, I think, at our next advisory board meeting. The notion there being that, you know, if this is going to be measured in years, not months, that we need to make this sustainable. And now that we have subcommittees stood up, there is now effectively another meeting happening, and so it actually should be happening on a bi-weekly basis anyway. But are open to feedback maybe at the next advisory board meeting. I think what we would ask of the subcommittees to do in terms of assignments for the next advisory board meeting are kind of 3 things. One is charters completed. It sounds like they are probably already are. Those could be circulated to Shannon. A work plan, right? So just starting to take that charter and put stakes in the ground as it regards to time. In the near term, it would be very helpful to be thinking about upcoming either subcommittee or advisory board agendas as kind of anchor points, right? As to what we should be discussing and reviewing. And then finally, to this point around budgets, I know it feels early, but, you know, especially as we look towards June, getting a sense of the type of support and rough budget that you might require for your respective subcommittee would be very helpful.
Thank you, Patrick. That's good. That's very important. All right, so we have like a little less than 5 minutes, but I want to stay on time. And when I look at what's left, there's two things that pop out at me. One is an update from Megan, but before you do that, we've been asked to, unless it's changed, we've been asked to join the select board tonight for a quarterly update.
On October 7th.
I thought it was tonight.
No.
Okay, then this can wait. That makes me feel
Well, so you're gonna meet, the advisory board will meet again on October 7th, so that's going to be the same day as the advisory board or the select board meeting. So really, if you have comments on the report, you're not.
gonna have a chance.
Yes,
Okay.
that's why it was on
Thank you.
this agenda.
Okay, so we have it, right, Patrick and I developed a draft, Shannon has made it intelligible and sort of contextualized, and so, has anyone, have we shared it? Or-
It's in the
It's in the
packet.
back, thank you, sorry. So, have people had a chance to look at it? Okay, so if people could look at it, and then maybe,
You can provide comments back to me, but the not so great thing is I start like a 15-day vacation as of Thursday, so.
as a fuse.
Yes, so if you could get comments back to me by Wednesday, they should be implemented.
I'll just make the comment that I thought in general, I thought I covered the right points and at a good level of detail. I think for the select board presentation, it would make sense to empower the chairs to just, come up with a, bullet point version that they talk to for whatever the allocation of time is gonna be, probably 10, 15 minutes or something like that.
That would be great, it started in some bullets and then.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, go back to that and, you take whatever input you get in the next couple of days and then just refine that down to what will actually be presented.
So I'd love to hear your thoughts. We talked a little bit about at the subcommittee level. Should we have a representative from each of the subcommittees there, or is it just enough that Patrick and I show up, or?
I think it's enough for the chairs to show up, but obviously anybody who wants to participate is welcome.
Thank you. So, probably making an update.
Yeah, it's more kind of questions, I think. So I don't have my whiteboard in here, but I'm gonna wheel it in next time. I can't thank you all enough for this conversation. I think it's been illuminating for me. And I'm thinking about these three areas, right? We have outreach, scenario development, which I think I like better than master planning for my brain, and then zoning and other interests that I think, Linda, that was an astute point. Geothermal example, but the things that fall outside of zoning that we care about. So we heard today that DCAM is going to do scenario development or hire a firm to work with the town to do that. But to come up with the scenario development, we need to do the outreach first. And so am I hearing from this advisory board that the town, that this group, either the subcommittee or the group entirety wants to take on the outreach to inform the scenario development process? Is that
That's my understanding with the help of a consultant.
with the help of?
Yes, and
Okay.
there is a scope of work.
Great. That, and that's an important piece for the budget too, is that, so, and that's great, so Paula said DCAM would do it if we didn't want to, but if we do want to, then that would be better. I think that will funnel into the scenario development piece nicely, and this group and the town can feel really confident that it's, your peers and connecting with everyone, so that's great. And so then that falls into, once we have outreach and scenario development, we have zoning and other things, and I don't know how we're gonna capture exactly. And so we're also going to work to hire a consultant to do the zoning piece for us, because that is going to take the outreach, take the scenario development and try to codify it in zoning and test it back as a circle with the folks that have been involved.
That's where I push back and say, why aren't we working with I'm gonna call it a master planner or a group that has interdisciplinary knowledge who does this. There are plenty of these consultants that do this, who would work with the zoning when it was time. But isn't just a zoning person on their own.
Okay.
So Elizabeth,
Stand back.
you're saying in Megan's step 2 is where you would say you would have a master planning
And
doing
however you want.
doing the scenario planning, not
Doing-
having DCAN run that process.
It's kind of like what you guys were talking about with the tap, but you're actually hiring someone to see it through the whole thing.
It's not a one-day process.
Right, so this person will take ownership
Right.
of every component of it.
Right.
And they have a zoning expert, obviously, but they
Yeah.
also have
Part of the team.
Yeah.
part of a team. This is what they do.
You're part of it.
Yeah, I think that's better use of our money.
But DCAM is hiring the scenario development team. So and so is that the route it should?
Well, what I'm responding to is the RFP for the zoning person, and I think just hiring the zoning person over here
Yeah.
isn't as effective as hiring someone who encompasses a firm that encompasses
Sure.
on that.
I got that.
Yeah,
So you could have a zoning person that would fall into the DCAM contract.
no, it would be our contract, it would be.
You're suggesting that DCAM not hire a scenario development, whatever we're calling it, and then we do.
I'm suggesting I guess so, I guess I'm suggesting we get an all-encompassing planning person on board to help us with the whole thing. I don't, yeah,
So my suggestion, I hear you, my suggestion would be that we bring that up at the next coordination meeting and talk that through. Because I hear Elizabeth's concerns, and she articulated well, and I don't have a good answer for that yet. So,
Okay, we can all agree we're doing outreach, so I can. get
yes,
along.
yes, and we have,
After that, we're still talking through.
and Megan, just if you haven't heard, there is a draft that Pat.
Okay, great.
That we can share.
I'll look at that.
It's pretty rocking. So is that, okay. Aaron,
Small point, maybe can I request that in a future agenda, maybe part of the subcommittee of the land use planning group, and then in our future agenda, we allocate a certain amount of time, because this seems like a important future. Spend the time on.
I want to make sure that I understand what you're just asking.
You've got your vice chair right here.
Right,
so-
right, like, from the subcommittee, and then I think there will need to be discussion of the next advisory board, October 7th.
So you want to carve out more time, right?
But
You're-
I'm still advocating for more time.
Yeah, okay, yeah, yes.
I think putting the budget attaching to the work plan is clearly helping us, I think, identify priorities in a real way with a real timeline. So I think this is good, but we are gonna need to come up with a proposed budget soon. So I think probably the next couple meetings are gonna have to
Deal with
flush
it.
this out more too.
Okay.
Yeah,
Great,
okay, thank you.
yep, thank you.
Maybe, Megan, if you could give, like, maybe in the next meeting also some guidance on how to think about, inputs to the budget, like the format,
Mm.
and then like how that is approved, right? So if
Yeah,
you've
it's gonna be the
got one
town
RFP or
managers.
2 RFPs, like how does that process work?
And I could build on that, maybe it's what your intention, but it would be nice if we're all 3 subcommittees are using the same sort of platform and language, and
Mhm.
so, 'cause that's gonna be hard.
Yeah, that's the kind of exercise that could take place at the subcommittees first, if you have some of that input, and then hopefully everybody's got it.
Best practice.
First draft of that,
Yeah.
by the next time we get together.
Yeah, I mean, I think if it's not already apparent, the idea is the work's getting done, real work's getting done in subcommittee level, and then we're coming here. And as a full group, getting a chance to weigh in and make a decision on it. The only other thing, and I looked at Megan, but I don't know if Paul's still on or not, but he is, but so. You don't have to have this answer now, but we talked also, I remember we talked about at the last coordination meeting about when they might see the survey results. I know Taylor's working on that.
Yeah, I think that they're still being input.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, great. All right, well, I would thank you, everybody. This was a really productive meeting, and especially the subcommittee's work, rocking, that we made as much progress as we did. I would entertain a motion. Oh, sorry.
I thought we had a very nice memo from Shannon about how to treat, public comment that comes in through email. Do we want to defer that till next? meeting or do?
No, I think we should take them because we are still getting it. And we did discuss that at the community engagement level, as well. Do you want to?
Sure, so essentially we have a couple of options. Well, first, if you are receiving emails directly, it would be great if you can forward emails that are intended to the full board to the designated town email address, just so it's easy to filter through, and then the board needs to decide how you would like to publish correspondence. So either they can be included at the end of your meeting packet, or they can be posted online. It's up to you.
Yeah, just so we say that out loud, it's MCI Concord Board at concordma.gov. And because we're probably not gonna have time for public comment today, it feels like if you have a comment and wanna make it, that's a great way to do that because we're losing people.
MCI board, want to just repeat that?
MCI Concord Board at concordma.gov. Yeah, so the options were correspondence package at the end of the advisory board versus webpage. I kind of like the web idea because it's one place to go for, you know, instead of having to, I find opening packets awkward for looking for that kind of stuff. It becomes a little searchable, but that's just my 2 cents. I like option 2.
Do we want to vote on that? Are we ready for people to feel comfortable? Which or so just quietly acknowledge that that's the direction?
Yeah, I don't think we
Okay,
need to vote, yeah.
All right, okay, so 2, great, thank you all for bringing that back up. Now, okay, we don't really, I mean,
We can take them, we just recognizing that we're not gonna take action on, and if people have to leave because it's the middle of the workday for some, we excuse them.
Okay, that sounds good. So if anyone has to leave, can leave. Are there comments, public comments that people want to be heard?
Yeah.
Theo. You're muted, Theo.
Yeah, I think should be all set. Sorry, I know you all want to leave here quickly, so I will be very staccato here. Theo Kinnemans, I'm actually the chair of the ZBA. Speaking on my own behalf, of course. I used to be a ULI member, and I'm also a certified planner. Just to give you a little bit of background, I'm very worried about the timeline, the time that all these efforts are going to cost. And I know we want to be very thoughtful about all of this, but Anita, and I think it was mentioned before that on the ULI, the TAP process, how well that could inform a process, but I think Anita, that we're you all seem to be further down the line, and especially given the duration of this process, it's, you know, by the time you get the report, I think, you know, if you lay it all out, you're 3 or 4 months at least down the line. So I think you want to be while you might want to do that process, you don't want that to hold you up. I also think that and that's my 2 cents coming from a big planning firm, that a planning firm could do all your visioning process, could get a framework into place for development. And I think that framework for development then can go out in an RFP for a developer. And I would suggest a developer to drive the bus on a master plan. Once a developer has a master plan in place, that plan then can be sort of dumbed down, if you will, into a zoning plan that that town meeting can vote on. Parallel to that, on that master plan, there can be a development agreement that is being put in place with the select board. Then there is a need for town meeting to vote on a zoning plan. It's typically very abstract. It's, you know, some colors, it's a lot of wording, but town meeting members might not understand what they're voting on. But if there in parallel can be a master plan with a development agreement that's being executed through the select board, I think that's a lot, could be a lot more palatable for town meeting members. And I think it also will, since it's and you know, I don't want to sound too negative here, but since it's a developer driving the bus and this person or this firm will have some money on the table, I think the bus will be driven at a good pace, and will hopefully shorten up the process. And that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Appreciate it. I don't see any other comments, so I'm going to suggest we adjourn. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.